Good morning. It's a real privilege to be with you this morning, including in the context of my role at Mitacs, because we're in the talent business. And of course, we're here to talk about talent, which is critical to Canada's future growth, productivity, and well-being, and a strength for Canada. And we're here, as we've been discussing this morning, at a critical moment. And I think an opportunity to attract and retain global talent from the US, from around the world, and from across Canada. It's being described as a talent war. There's certainly growing competition for talent, including Canadians leaving the US. And our discussion will be about how to play to win. And we'll touch on many different issues, from business investment and creating the environment to attract and retain talent, government policy and education, research and innovation, immigration, labor mobility, and support for underrepresented groups, including Indigenous peoples. I'm joined today by three great panelists. First, I'll introduce Lisa Raitt, who's the Vice Chair of CIBC Capital Markets and Global Investment Banking. She joined CIBC in January 2020 and focuses on senior client coverage and business development in energy, infrastructure, and industrial sectors. And previously was the President and CEO of the Toronto Port Authority. And as I knew her, held a number of senior portfolios as the Minister of Natural Resources, Labour and Transport in the Government of Canada. Next to Lisa is Andrew Thomson, who's the Chief of Government Relations at the University of Toronto and was appointed to that role in 2016. And he has over 20 years of leadership experience, including various senior cabinet roles in Saskatchewan. And he works to emphasize the potential of research and innovation to positively impact our country socially, culturally, and economically. And to Andrew's left is Ken Chatoor, who's the Director of Research and Strategic Foresight at the Labour Market Information Council, where he works to develop and implement the LMIC vision for research to support Canada's labour market data needs, and has extensive experience in education, labour market policy and research, and published reports on a whole range of topics, including mental health as well as labor market transitions. So let's get started. Lisa, I'll turn to you first. So how do we play to win for talent globally?
How do we play to win for talent globally? Thank you very much for moderating. Thank you very much, Public Policy Forum, for having me here today. I always love this event, and I'm glad to let you know that these are the most comfortable chairs I've ever sat on for a panel, so we may be here for a while. One of the volunteer things I do is I co-chair an entity called the Coalition for a Better Future with Anne McClellan, and it's usually Anne and I talk about these kinds of things. She's not here today, so I get to take the entire time, but I would let you know that how we're going to win is we got to focus in, I think, on three things. You're going to have to use different tools to attain these things, and that's going to be up to the policymakers. But first and foremost, we're going to have a hard time attracting top talent unless we address housing affordability. It's fundamental. That is one of the things that people look at. The second thing that we hear from students when we speak to them across the country, because as part of the coalition, Anne and I have done a university tour. I know it sounds weird, two women over 55 doing a university tour. There's no keg stands involved, I can tell you that. But we do talk to a lot of professional students, we do talk to a lot of grad students. So first and foremost that comes up is housing affordability. The second one that comes up is wage competitiveness. They know how much money you can make in other countries. They know exactly what you can make in Canada. They do the calculation. And that one thing that we're going to have to work hard to try to figure out to get around. And the third one actually is an interesting one for me as well, and that is career opportunities. They may not see the ability to rise as far as they want to rise in the companies that are present in Canada, because we may not be big enough for them. So if you have a superstar who wants to strive and do really well, their opportunity to move and zigzag from one place to another is really constrained here in Canada. So those, I'd say, would be the three things, Stephen, that we have to think about: housing affordability, wage competitiveness, and making sure that young people or young talent see a path to a greatness that they aspire to.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. Andrew, perhaps I'll see if you want to jump in on.
Well, Lisa kind of said everything, which is
No,
good.
I didn't.
All I can say is if you've missed the Kiggers, you've been going to the wrong universities. So it's, these are certainly, as we're talking to early in career researchers, as we're listening to top students who are wanting to come to universities, what we're hearing across not just Canada and the US, but globally, is that they are looking for a lot of the same things that Lisa's identified. But they're also looking for clusters of talent where they can expand their own expertise. Mm-hmm. And I think this, for us in Canada, is a challenge. We like to spread that peanut butter. We want to make sure every corner of the country's got something going on in it, and preferably a little bit of everything. The problem is that doesn't actually work when you're attracting talent. The talent that we've attracted over the last decade to the university, and I'm thinking about folks that we're getting from Yale or from Harvard or from other places in the US who are really at the top of their field. They're coming here and they're telling us they're coming for really 2 or 3 main reasons. First of which certainly is the opportunity to collaborate with others. They do want that ability to be able to expand their knowledge, to expand their thinking. Second is they love our communities. Canadian culture is a really important factor for bringing people here. Not just because it's a response to what they see happening in the United States, but because they feel included here. Even as recent immigrants, they feel included here. And with the number of faculty members that we hear who say that this is where they want to be able to raise their kids, our school systems are good and they're safe, and there's opportunities. And I think the third reason that people do want to come to Canada is because there's a sense of ambition still in the country. This is something that we need to work very hard not to lose. And when the last panel was talking about where those opportunities are, we need to really think about how do we ambitiously go after that to make sure we've got a strong AI sector, or to make sure we've got a strong critical minerals sector, to make sure that we're growing in drug discovery, and that those are having an impact in our communities. Those are the big reasons we hear talent wanting to come here. And so it's a lot like what Lisa's talked about. It's the fundamentals of what makes Canada great is also, I think, reflected within our institutions and within many of our companies.
That's great, thanks, Andrew. Ken.
Yeah, I think one of the neat things about working at LMIC is we get to have a bird's eye view of what's going on in each of the provinces and territories, as well as the federal government. And what I can see is that we have really robust systems in place. We have one of the best education systems in the world. We're one of the most educated workforces on the planet. We're often at the top or near the top of the OECD for the most educated workforce. And I think that being able to leverage our systems and fine-tuning them a bit and streamlining some parts of it, I think will go a very long way in making us even more attractive to talent around the world that we'll get into in this panel for sure.
That's great, thanks. Thanks each of you. We're going to now dive into some more specific areas. Ken, maybe you can give us a bit of a snapshot of what's the labor market look like in Canada now? Are the shortages we had seen that were quite acute a few years ago persisting? And how about skill mismatch? Because we have a highly educated population, but not necessarily in jobs that can best use all those skills.
Yes, absolutely. The labor market is in flux right now. Underemployment is just under 7%. Youth unemployment is a bit over double that right now. And while that's elevated, that's pretty close to within the historical norm. We're witnessing immediate layoffs in response to the tariffs in the auto sector, the agriculture sector. Those are some of the big areas of concern. We are also hearing from the provinces about concerns in the lumber industry as well. But there are underlying issues in the labor market that are beyond the tariffs and have been going on for years, specifically labor market imbalances. It is most acute in healthcare, and it's not just doctors and nurses, it's a lot of the occupations around doctors and nurses. It's also true in the construction sector as well, which directly impacts housing policy, which was brought up earlier as well. And this matters for attracting talent for 2 reasons. The first is that we may want to think about strategically attracting talent in some of those areas that we know that we need labor, in addition to industries that we know are going to be growing, like artificial intelligence. And secondly, we want to make sure that our core systems have a good labor supply to support the needs of the talent that we want to come to Canada. So yeah, that's how I would summarize where things are right now in the labor market.
That's great, thanks. Andrew, I know U of T has recently attracted some leading talent from the United States, and there's other organizations here in Toronto, such as the University Health Network, looking to attract talent. Can you just tell us a little bit about the strategy and how it could be scaled or applied more broadly in the country?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we forget when we think about the universities, and particularly the universities, I mean, the colleges do a good job in training for the jobs that are there. Universities do some of that too, but they've got an added ability, which is to create new industries and new jobs. And that's really been one of the areas where University of Toronto in particular has been thinking over the last decade about how do we attract talent to do that. If you look, for example, at AI, everyone talks about AI now. They weren't talking about it 10 years ago, not in the same way. 10 years ago when we were going to government and saying, look, we should develop a pan-Canadian AI strategy, there was a lot of kind of shrug about, well, what is it going to do? How many job-killing robots are you going to build? What does this mean for us? 10 years in, what we've seen as a result of the research that's been coming out of the universities, the entrepreneurship that's coming with faculty as they're creating startups and scale-up companies, the amount of VC that's coming in to the country to support those, is we've all of a sudden got a large industry here. In Ontario alone, there's 55,000 people who work in AI. That's not a small number of people. There's 145,000 that work in the complete supply chain of auto. 55,000 people in AI. Those are jobs that really didn't exist 10 years ago. And they're jobs that exist because we've been able to bring in bright minds who are able to work with venture capitalists, who are able to work with groups of existing strong businesses like the banks who have been great early adopters of AI, to think about how to adopt, how to adapt, how to create those kind of talents. We think we've got the same ability to do that in probably 2 or 3 or 4 other areas where Canada can really move to a position of advantage. Certainly in areas like advanced materials, big opportunity on that. Critical minerals, huge opportunity to think about what that does, what that looks like within our sector. And advanced manufacturing. And advanced manufacturing, thinking about things like drug discovery and other pieces that we've not really kind of moved into in the past. So, one of the great things about attracting that talent is it gives you that opportunity to look just slightly over the horizon at what's next. And that's something that as Canadians, we've got to figure out how to embrace more of and how to support, but we've also got to be able to place some bets. That doesn't mean in everything. Let's figure out where we think we can get that talent, who those people are, and let's develop it, whether they're Canadian or whether they're foreign.
That's great. We're going to shift now to focus on some issues within Canada. Certainly, we know that Canada has extraordinary talent across the country, but not all segments and groups in our population are fully supported or represented in the workforce, including Indigenous peoples. Lisa, what can we do to increase the participation of Indigenous peoples and other underrepresented or disadvantaged groups in our country and economy?
Well, first of all, you want to listen to the experts. I'm not an expert, but I listen to JP Gladu, who's here today. I listen to Mark Podlosly, who's here as well. And I think what they would tell you is that you have to make places available, and you have to have a program involved where you're bringing people in and you're mentoring. I will tell you that there's an incredible amount of talent. Next week is the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, which is a large conference that's going to be here in Toronto on Monday and Tuesday. I think they picked it the date before. They actually set the general election, so it's a complete coincidence. But on the second day of that, I get to moderate a panel, a luncheon, with up-and-coming Indigenous professionals. Oh my gosh, these are incredibly impressive people who are already out there. And my fear is that in Canada, we don't recognize that ability. We don't recognize that we just have to go out and find it and aggressively pursue that talent that is homegrown, that is here already. Because I can tell you, I've been told that there are going to be other universities from other countries who are going to be at this and looking at whether or not they're going to be able to attract our Indigenous talent. And I think if we have an opportunity to make sure that we are doing the best jobs that we can. First of all, you have to have internal policies in your companies in terms of promotion. You have to make sure that you are training. You have to make sure that you make your place welcoming. It's an understanding that's different. You have to support companies, for example, that are Indigenous run, that actually want to invest in a project because 7 generations out, they want to be fully in charge of the entire project, from the chair of the board right down to whoever is sweeping the floors. And that, to me, is the kind of plan that we should be supporting, that we should be helping out on. But again, I'm not the expert in it. I'm just merely a happy bystander and hopefully helping along the ride.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. And I think it's really important to have champions. One of the things that I think we also need to think about championing is helping Canadians who are in the workforce, or perhaps out of the workforce temporarily, get the skills they need to succeed. Ken, maybe I'll turn to you on this one. Andrew mentioned artificial intelligence, of course, something that's washed across all the shores around the globe, will impact us in every aspect of our lives, in business, in society, civil society, government. What are your perspectives on helping support upskilling of workers to be able to work with these disruptive and innovative technologies?
I think it's tremendously important. And when we talk about attracting talent and developing the talent within Canada, there is a need for more training among the general population for how to use AI at work. We want Canadian workers to feel empowered and have agency with how they're using artificial intelligence for, everyday tasks at work, instead of being intimidated or afraid of it. And Canada's approach has been a little different compared to some other countries based on some studies that have been done on this. And while we've done a really excellent job of building really great leadership and expertise within AI, our general population is lagging a little bit in developing that broader, more applicable skill set when it comes to being able to use that at work. And that's important because the use of AI at work and as a regular skill like communication or teamwork is something that we expect is likely going to happen. So getting people familiar with that, whether through at-work training or having a national approach to how we want to upskill the population with that, I think is something that is worth exploring. And there are other jurisdictions that we can look to who have begun to do this in some really interesting ways, especially in the EU and also Australia and New Zealand as well.
That's great. Ken, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, let me just jump in on that. I agree with that. I think the other piece we need to tackle is credentialing experience that's already there. And how do we create that kind of pathway from people who have maybe the base level skills and simply need to figure out what are the next steps in that. That's a fundamental thinking of kind of how Canadians engage in the labor force. Because we've tended to look at it as when you go to a job, you get a job, then you leave the workforce, go to a university or college, and then you look to come back into the workforce. We've got to figure out how to kind of more seamlessly work through that. This was certainly a conversation I was having with a bank, not yours, but about, I'm sure yours has the same kind of great thinking, but it's about, how do you not lose that workforce that you've already got? So how do you build those skills while you're still retaining that talent? Companies are investing a lot. There's specialized knowledge with the sectors. That's one of the things we are certainly seeing is that the depth of knowledge in individual sectors and businesses is growing. They don't want to lose that. So I think universities and colleges are going to have to become a lot more adept in figuring out how to provide micro-credentials, how to make sure we recognize existing skills, and to find new supports to help people to go through that retraining so that they can stay in their jobs, stay in their house, raise their families.
Ken, I'm going to pick up, or Andrew, I'm going to pick up on one of the points you just made about retaining talent. Because, of course, it's one thing to attract talent. People coming into the education system in Canada to stay and work in Canada, or people from the US or abroad. But it's critically important to retain talent and support people. Lisa, you had mentioned a couple of those factors on the minds of students that you and Anne heard about, wages and the career prospects. It'd be great to get your insights on talent retention.
He's talking to you.
Yeah, I was afraid of that because I was thinking through what the answer to that is. Retention is a big piece of it. I was actually thinking about a conversation I was having with a federal deputy minister the other day, and we were talking about this kind of avalanche of interest from the Americans about coming up to Canada. And the question that I was asked is, do we think these are just kind of colloquially academic refugees? Are these just people wanting to come and hide out for 4 years to avoid Trump? It's a good question. And I think what we've got to figure out is how do you kind of separate that out? Who are the people that are coming here to really invest, in that, and how do they support the rest of the ecosystem that's already here? It requires a big shift in mindset in that we've got to move to a growth mindset in the country. We've got to think about new industries. We've got to think about expanding. We've got to think about attracting capital which can support that talent growth. So I think that it is it's not a simple answer. It's going to require a lot of things to go right, but it's also going to require some real intent on the part of government, and I would say business has got to step up in this regard. We've got to get rid of this kind of mentality of what we call cottage capitalism, where people are more interested in how do you get the dividend return so you can expand your cottage in Muskoka, rather than put that money back into an investment in perhaps a high-risk venture that's actually going to create potential returns in the future. This isn't something inherently Canadian. We've got to figure out how to be prepared to take more risk and do it in areas where we think we've got an ability to grow.
Can I weigh in on that one? Because I don't want us to slag off Canada as a place, and you're not doing it, but let's start from the principles of what we have to offer, right? Like the foundation of it. So we have a strong public healthcare system. It may wait a while, but we do have a strong public healthcare system. We have safe, diverse, and inclusive cities, especially inclusive. We've got high levels of political and economic stability. There's no, although it's been a very intense last 3 weeks or 5 weeks or so, but that'll all be over on Monday. We actually have a pretty good work-life balance when you take a look at it. We have more vacation time. We have shorter work weeks compared to the United States. We have robust labor protections. We have parental leave policies. Like, we've got a lot of stuff that really does give us that entrance into how we can retain people. There's a good foundation there for us, I think. But it comes down to the companies wanting to shrink that wage gap between us and the United States.
That's great. Ken, maybe I'll turn to you for another dimension of retention, but also of competitiveness, including within Canada in the services sector, and addressing critical issues such as the one Lisa mentioned in our healthcare system, which is labor mobility. We're talking now about taking down trade barriers and truly having, for the first time ever, free trade in Canada. Can you speak to labor mobility and the prospects of actually seeing change there?
Yeah, it's a huge issue right now. So a couple of weeks ago, LMIC hosted a meeting with labor ministry folks from all the provinces and territories, as well as ESDC and Statistics Canada. And we met to talk about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and where are we going. And the great news is that everyone agrees that it's a good thing and it should happen, which is awesome. The bigger challenge, though, is how do we do that and what does that actually look like? And basically the reason why that's the case is because there's a need for serious consensus building around the sensitivities and vulnerabilities of each of the provinces in the country. One of the things that people have kind of mentioned and are concerned about is the possibility of local or regional brain drains if we don't do this right and in a sustainable way. Think about it in sort of two different ways. There are core sectors that every province needs. That's like things like healthcare, housing, trades workers. And then in addition to that, they also have their differentiated economies, which is one of the great strengths of the country, right? And so in addition to that, you also want to give all Canadians freedom of mobility to work and live wherever they want. And so right now where we are is everyone's trying to find a balance between those three things. Pretty easy task, right? Like, surely no problems there. But I think part of the challenge is just making sure we get everyone at the table, everyone has a voice. What made me really happy and hopeful after that meeting is I got messages from British Columbia wanting to meet with someone they heard say something from Alberta. We had folks from Saskatchewan asking me to connect them to folks in Ontario and New Brunswick. So it is happening. I do believe the window of opportunity is quite open right now, but we really have to take advantage of it. And it can only happen through convening. And I also mentioned that the Forum of Labor Market Ministers is working on this as we speak. So I'm cautiously optimistic if we can work through some of those regional needs.
I think, as you noted, political leadership and will is so critical in enabling labor mobility. We saw it happen overnight in the pandemic for health workers. I don't think there's any reason why it can't happen today.
Hear, hear.
But we should understand what the implications of that are. And I think that this is not going to be without a fundamental shift.
Yeah.
I mean, Mike Bloomberg used to say that capital attracts talent faster than, or talent attracts capital faster than capital attracts talent. Funding is going to go where those specialists want to be. And I think that we need to understand that a lot of specialists that are in regional centers across this country will, by choice, want to associate in areas where there are other specialists. That potentially means we end up with a giant center of medical expertise in Montreal, one in Vancouver, maybe Edmonton, and obviously Toronto. What does that mean if you aren't in one of those major centers? We've got to think through what that access protocol is going to look like on those pieces. I mean, we have it in banking. There's a reason all the bank towers are a couple of blocks from here. That can happen in the public services too, and I think that's one of the things we've got to be mindful of when we talk about, you know, the utopia of labor mobility, is that it will move to where it thinks it will most benefit. And realistically, that means a big, you know, boon and a lot of pressure on major metropolitan areas already.
Yeah, I actually have a very specific example of that. I believe it was from Saskatchewan. For certain healthcare programs, they have to have their people go to another province to get trained and hope that they come back to practice in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
That is not ideal. And so I think those are also fundamental issues that will have to be addressed for total free mobility across the country for that to work.
That's great. We're ticking down to the end, and I'm glad to see you picked up in the questions and responses, some of the ones coming from the audience and in Slido. Perhaps we'll do a final round just for a very short response. Of course, there's an election on Monday. What advice would you give to the government, whoever forms government, as well as business leaders, in terms of one or two things to do to attract and retain talent globally and from across Canada? Lisa, we'll start.
Build a pipeline. But nonetheless, I think, just picking up on Michelle. So I would say stick to the knitting on the things you can do. What a government can do fundamentally is they can reduce red tape, they can reduce bureaucracy, they can make it easier for entrepreneurs to come together. I'm gonna segue into whoever the anonymous person is who asked about the 1/4 of Canadians as a caregiver today. Half can't work at full capacity because of their responsibilities. How do we tap this productivity? Keep asking that question. Yep. 12 of you also gave the thumbs up on it. That is a huge matter in this country. And to be honest, the burden of the caregiving falls upon the women in our society every single time, and they're the ones that have to step back in their career, probably between 50 and 65 years old, as a result of these caregiving responsibilities. So I know it's a labor panel. I shouldn't be talking about this stuff, but thank you whoever gave me my little Billy pup with that one. So keep bringing it up.
Andrew?
Well, let me use the Canadian cliche. The next government's got to focus on skating to where the puck is going to be. We have spent far too much time ragging the puck in the country, and we have got to figure out how to embrace really bold change and put the money behind it that'll allow us to move forward. Yes, we've got to strip back a lot of the regulatory red tape that is in the country, which is prohibiting that. We've got to realize we're going to function within a big global economy. A multipolar global economy is much different than what we've had before, where money can very easily just go and float it down to the United States and work easily. We're going to have to get smarter. We're smart people. Let's have a government that recognizes that and takes advantage of that. And that's especially true with young people. I think we've really got to figure out how we need to change systems to adapt to the kind of lifestyles that they expect they can have as Canadians.
That's right. Ken?
If I had to think of one thing that they could work on, right, is whoever gets elected, this window of opportunity we have to actually seriously discuss interprovincial mobility and trade. I am amazed that it's happening, and I am amazed that everyone is currently on board. I think that if working in policy, know that windows of opportunity, they don't stay open, and so I would say take advantage of this moment while the iron is still hot and everyone is willing to work together, and do as much as you can while you have that time. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you so much to our panelists.
Thank you.